Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. We did the build over the weekend, and I haven't got much out since then, to be honest. I ended up with some really bad sunburn. I don't know if you can see, but it actually burnt, like blistered across my back. And I think it was because I was wearing one of these shirts, so it kept on falling off my shoulder. So even though I put a whole lot of sunscreen on and wore a hat and everything else, that one patch on that shoulder just got really badly burnt. So I'm guessing it's just because these shirts have a tendency to fall off my shoulder, and I will have to remember that for all future things that require me to be out in the sun. So we haven't got any further on the build as yet because James had to head home, who is my cousin. He had to head home because he had to work this week, and Darryl cut his hand. I don't know if I mentioned it. He cut his hand on the Friday before we did it. So we've given a couple of days of just downtime. It's really hot and sticky at the moment. It's pretty overcast, but it's really, really warm. But I think that we'll be able to put the rest of the walls and the roof up on the buildings on our own, and then just wait for James to come back to get the breezeway finished. But we'll see how we go, and I'll update you as we do it. But at the moment, there's been no progress on the building so far. Darryl has a busy weekend this weekend with stuff with the church. They've got a cleaning bee and something else, so he's doing that this weekend as well. So I'm going to just get in on the admin type stuff, get some of these videos sorted, the voiceovers and stuff, but also try and work on the website and get some recipes done out with the pictures, and try and figure out what I'm going to do in regards to like the Patreon type thing or what, I don't know yet, but I'm working on all of that at the moment. So a lot of behind the scenes kind of stuff going on. But I did get the notes written up for the next food prep, so that's what I'm going to do today. So today's video is one of the food prep videos, following on from the last one. I think this might be part 4 or 5, I'm not real sure, but it's just the everyday way that we process, preserve and use the food, because we only shop every 6 weeks. So it really does impact the way we eat and the way we cook and things like that, and that's what we're sharing. We do seem to be running low on quite a few things this month, and I'm not entirely sure why. Change of seasons, maybe. It's not quite as hot as it was, so we're eating slightly differently. I'm not sure. We had visitor for a couple of days. I don't know, but I also was pretty short on cash last month, so I skimped a little bit, and then we're short in cash again this month, so I'm going to skimp a little bit. It just means that we have to stretch things a little further. Plenty of food. We're just running out of some of the things that are staples that we'd normally have. Some by the end. I think we've only got like 6 cans of coconut cream left, which is really strange, and we've got 2.5 weeks before I come back again from shopping, I think that's how it works. So anyway, I'll have to do inventories and stuff and assess all that towards the end of the fortnight, but at the moment we are making food a little bit differently and trying to be aware of what's there and what's not to last us through that period of time. But this is the food prep following on from the last one, so the next couple of days of what we did with food and how we made what we had last. So enjoy watching. Thanks guys. Alrighty, so the second pork roast. So I generally buy 2 or 3 of these pork roasts per shopping trip. If you buy 3, you get case pricing, which used to be $1 a kilo cheaper, which worked out quite good. But I noticed last time I was at Costco that it's now only like 50 cents a kilo cheaper, which every saving is a saving, but I don't always need 3 of them, though they are a really cheap meat, and maybe I need to rely on them a little bit more, especially while we're trying to, you know, do what we're doing with money, because I think it's $7.99 a kilo or $7.49 a kilo on a case for a case pricing. Chicken breasts last month were $9.89 a kilo, thighs were $11.29, and the beef was $9.99. So it's still cheaper than all of those items, and it's very versatile. So maybe I need to buy the case pricing, save that little bit per kilo, and get those 3 next month, especially while we're looking at money wise. So the plan for the second pork roast is to can half of it, or about a canner's load worth of jars. So I did my normal. I cut it in half, and then I cut the rind off and chunked it up evenly, distributing the fat evenly through those chunks. Then I filled jars with them, so I pack the jars really nice and firmly, as it will shrink when it's cooked. I don't put anything else in the jars, but you can put salt, you can put seasoning and all that sort of thing, but we like to have them plain because it makes them more versatile if they're plain on the shelf. Clean the rims and rubber rings like normal, so clean the rims with white vinegar. I am using Fowler's Vicola jars. They have a rubber ring that goes around the rim, so I like to clean the rim with white vinegar, put the rubber ring on, and then clean the rubber ring with vinegar as well. Then they have stainless steel lids that go on top, and then clips. Now these are 31s, Fowler's Vicola 31s, which are about the equivalent of a quart jar. Fowler's Vicola does not recommend using their jars for pressure canning. However, I have always done it, and a lot of people have done it, and they are a really thick glass, like much thicker than ball jars and things like that. So I don't understand why they're not. I think just because Fowler's Vicola method, it suggests its jars for its own method, that's all. I double clip for pressure canning. That's a debated topic. People say you only need one clip because the jars don't vent properly and that sort of thing, but I am working with second-hand supplies, and my clips are dirty, as you can see, because I don't soak and scrub them, because everything in my environment gets dirty again, and they're not coming into contact with any food, so it doesn't worry me. So my clips are fairly dirty, which means I can't see the exact sizing on them. Some fit looser than others, and I prefer to put 2 on there. You will notice that one of the jars only had a single clip, and that's because that clip fit perfectly. It was super snug and everything else, so I just left the one on there. But I prefer two clips for pressure canning. I generally only use 1 for water bath canning, but I generally use 2 for pressure canning. So the standard pressure canning, 3 to 4 quarts of water in the bottom of the canner. I use 3 for my Presto. I tend to use 4 for my Buffalo because it's a larger canner. A rack in the bottom, jars in the bottom of the canner. Turn it on. Now, these jars were cold, so the water that went in there was cold, so the jars go in there cold into cold water. One of the things with pressure canning is siphoning. Siphoning is where the liquid in the jars ends up in the water in the canner instead of staying in the jars. One of the ways to avoid this is not to bring the temperature up too fast. So I like to turn it on low and slowly crank it up, the temperature, as I go until it starts hissing steam, and then I stop. It doesn't need to be on full because I use the Camp Chefs as well, which are a high BTU burner. So it doesn't need to be on full. So I start low and I bring it up until it starts shooting steam. Once you've got a steady stream of steam coming out, you time it for 10 minutes. After that 10 minutes, you put the weight on. I use a 15-pound weight because I'm over 1,000 feet in altitude. You want that weight to start dancing, and what I say, you want it to slow dance. So you want it to be shifting slightly and letting a bit of steam out and shifting. You never want it to be stationary because then there's not enough steam, but you just want it to twitch. You just want it to slow dance, not to tap dance. Once it's slow dancing, then you start your timer for 90 minutes for the quart equivalent of meat to go in there. Whilst I was doing all that, Darryl sliced up the rind from the pork and put it over some potatoes to cook. He also chunked up the other half of the roast for me on the other side of the bench for mincing for a different meal as well. So we got that sorted as well. After that, I wanted to get the beef sorted and out of the fridge into the freezer instead. So I cut it up. I sorted it as I went. I keep some nice meaty diced bits aside for using in stews or pies or whatever else. This box, there was 3 bags in the box. This box was very different to the last couple that I've got. And actually when I went to the butcher at Costco and asked for a box of beef trim, he said that it's very, I think the word he used was bitty. But I decided to go with it anyway because even if I had to mince the whole thing, then that was fine. I did get a couple of kilos of chunks out of it, but not very much. But the other thing that was in it was these big sheets of really thin cut beef, like a sandwich steak or a stir fry beef or something like that. I've never had that in any of the other boxes. So what I did was I pulled that really thin sheet type steak out and put it in a bowl. I put as many chunks of reasonably lean beef into another bowl to use for stews and things like that. You want a little bit of fat, but you don't want like silver skin and things like that, though we are going to slow cook it, so it's not a huge issue. And then everything else goes into the third bowl, which will be what gets turned into mince. I weighed it all so that I could portion for different meals, so I knew how many meals I could get out of each sort. So I believe there was 3 kilos of 3 kilos of the stir-fry beef, I think, and then 2 kilos of the diced beef, and then the rest was the mince and that sort of thing. But just so that I knew how many meals I was going to make out of each style of that beef, and then put it all back in the fridge for the moment to keep it nice and chilled. By that point, the 9-minute processing time had finished for the pork and the valve had dropped. So once the 90-minute time is up, turn the heat off, and then eventually the valve will drop, which lets you know that there's no pressure left in the pressure canner. Then I tend to crack the lid and leave it for 5 minutes. Then I take the lid off and get the jars out. I did notice that one of the jars didn't have any bubbles going on. And there was no liquid in it. So I examined that jar quite extensively, and there was actually a crack in the bottom. So all the liquid had siphoned out of that jar and it wasn't pressurized. So that jar now had to go into the fridge to be used. It couldn't be left on the shelf. For dinner that night, I hadn't planned anything, and it was getting quite late by the time that I finished everything else. We'd snacked on potatoes that had been cooked under the rind and had lunch or whatever, but still had a bunch of those potatoes left. So I decided to do more testing with the air fryer and the jackery. So I plugged the air fryer into the jackery and cooked some frozen chips to go with the potatoes that we already had, trying to see if I put less in there, if it took less time, if I put the whole bag in there, how much time it took to do a whole bag and how cooked they were and things like that. I still must say I'm not overly enamored of the air fryer. It isn't doing much for me in potato wise anyway, which is partly what I bought it for, but that's fine. I did cook one of those split chickens, half split chickens, which I think will be on the next video, that I defrosted and put in there in 20 minutes, which was great, but it probably would have taken the same time in the barbecue anyway. And I did do some pork and prawn dumplings again. It'll be a future video in there as well to test that out. So I'm still working on it, but yeah, I must say that I'm not overly enamored on it, and I'm glad I only spent the $60 on it. So we did more frozen chips with that. Then I topped up the potatoes. We did a couple of trays. I'm just showing you a tray here. Topped up the potatoes with the frozen chips as well, and then used that jar of failed pork on top as like a pulled pork topping. I put the pulled pork over the top of it, and then added some dairy-free cheese, which I had made in the Thermomix, and some gravy, and it was just a really rich, super decadent meal. I believe I made the kids a yogurt and fruit smoothie to have with that as the, veggie / fruit for that meal. So mind you, it's potato in it, but so they had the fruit smoothies along with that sort of poutine-esque type meal. The next day I double checked the seals on the jars, wiped them down with some vinegar water especially because that other jar had siphoned in, so they had a little bit of grease on the outside of them. That's just about not attracting things on the shelf. So if it goes up on the shelf and there was like even a jam has a bit of sugar or something on it, you can attract ants and bugs and stuff. So you want to wipe down those jars, warm soapy water, vinegar water, whatever you want to use. I just happen to use some vinegar water for this particular lot. Wipe down the jars to make sure they're nice and clean, label them and get them on the shelf. So that was the first thing that I did in the morning. Check to make sure that those seals were secure as well. I had put one of those rolled turkeys that we got in the hamper in the fridge to defrost the day before, so I sliced it up once it was defrosted to check it out. It was still a little icy in the middle, so we decided to use it in something that required warming up. So for lunch that day we had quesadillas. I still had some of the Costco tortillas, the Burrito Mission tortillas that I buy, and some of the cheese from the night before, the dairy-free cheese, which turned into almost like a cream cheese paste when it's put in the fridge. So we tore up the turkey, put some onion jam and mayo, and cook them off on the cast iron to have as quesadillas. It really reminds me at times like that how much I miss the fact that we've got no tomatoes this year, because normally I'd have sliced tomato on there, maybe some greens, some spinach or some basil or something, but with the gardens just as bad as they are, nothing's much is coming out of them at all. But tomato would have been really nice on those as well. And I just sliced them all up for everyone to eat. The kids like to make some as well, so a bit like when I do sushi and things like that, I tend to make a couple for Darryl and I, and then put all the ingredients out on the bench, and they can make their own after that with whatever they want on them as well. I pulled out the thin beef for dinner that night, so there'll be 2-ish meals worth of it, but I velveted the whole lot. And I'm just going to freeze half of it for a meal for later on in the month, and then we'll have this one for this meal. So I did the standard velveting with the bicarb and soy sauce, cornstarch, and some seasonings. I used a bit of the Vegeta because it has some MSG in it, which works well in velveting. I think there's some oyster sauce on it, some sesame oil, all those sorts of flavors, mixed and a bit of water, massaged into that beef, and then put back in the fridge. The second meal will be really nice too, because quite often when you freeze it already velveted and then you cook it up the next time, it's even more tender than it would be the first time when you haven't frozen it. So that will go back into the, so a serve will be vacuum sealed into the freezer, and the serve will be served for dinner. Velveting is I don't know whether it's strictly Chinese, but it is definitely something that you find in Chinese food, and it's just a way to tenderize cuts that aren't necessarily as tender as you would like for a quick cook stir fry. The geese are coming to say hello again. It's dinner time. I thought they'd be over with the children getting fed, which might be why they're making so much noise, because they're actually heading away from me now. So maybe they saw the kids go out to the chicken fence. Anyway, so I was saying velveting is really good for cuts of meat that you don't know if they're going to be too tough to quick cook in. Something like a stir fry, you're only really flash frying that meat. So you just want it to be nice and tender. It works really well. It's nice on chicken too if you've got a really, sometimes when you buy chicken it's really tough, and velveting it will help with that too. It does, because it does have the cornstarch in there, it tends to thicken whatever it's going into, so it works well for a stir fry sauce because it makes that stir fry sauce a little bit more viscous, which is always nice. After that, I decided to make a batch of chocolate custard in the Thermomix for ice cream. I think that one of these, the custards and things like that, is one of the stars items in a Thermomix. Not everyone would agree, but for me, I use my Thermomix as a sous chef, basically. So it is doing things that I would have to stand over and do, and custards are one of those things. It is so easy to curdle a custard and so easy to burn a custard, whereas with the Thermomix you throw all the ingredients in at once and you turn it on and it makes you a perfect custard. So for this one we're making a chocolate custard for ice cream. So I put dark chocolate. I had some Lindt dark chocolate that was from the hamper run a couple of times ago. I think it was still in my fridge safe. So I put that in and grind that up into crumbles and then add all the other ingredients. So there's coconut cream, some vanilla. You want vanilla that has alcohol in it because that helps it to stop setting up as hard. 8 egg yolks, I think, because I did a double batch of this, and a bit of sugar, and sugar varies depending on how sweet your chocolate is. This is a very bitter chocolate, so I did the full sugar amount, and you just cook it. So it cooks for 8 to 10 minutes on sort of 100 degrees at speed 3.5, 4, and so it's constantly stirring while cooking it with those eggs in, and you end up with a lovely luscious custard. Now if I had have added like cornstarch or something to that custard, it could be a custard that you then put in the fridge and set up to eat as custard, but I didn't, because this one's being turned into ice cream, so I intend to churn this one, but I could have just added some cornstarch when I was making the custard, and we'd have like a Yogo-esque custard for, I don't know whether Yogo is Australian, a chocolate custard, cold chocolate custard that could be served as a custard, sort of like a mousse. Anyway, that sort of thing. But this one's being intended for making chocolate ice cream, so it's a fairly thin custard because it'll be churned into ice cream. Anyway, I also decided to get the beef minced up, so I am again using my Louvel grinder. I rave about this every time. I do have an affiliate code for Louvel, so if you ever want to buy anything from Louvel, I do get a kickback if you use my code or my link. I really enjoy this grind. I've had a couple. This one is a fairly low wattage, because that's one of the things is that I tested when we first got a grinder. I didn't want to have to turn the generator on to use a grinder. So it has a fairly low power draw, and it's really simple to put together and pull apart. Everything just clicks into place. It's really easy to clean, and it just runs. It takes like a minute per kilo of meat, and it's just, I really enjoy it. So I ran all the beef through the mincer. I used a coarse grind. Now, I probably should have used the slightly finer grind for this particular beef, because those bags had a lot of bits and pieces in it. There's some gristly bits in, we have had some of that minced since then for something, and there's definitely some gristly bits in it. So fine for things that are going to be cooked for a decent amount of time, not so good for a quick fry. I think we did it for nachos or something, and there was a few bits in there that you sort of went, eh. So if I'm going to use it for something like that, I'll probably run it through the grinder a second time. But normally we just do a coarse grind and turn it into things like smash burgers and all that sort of stuff. But the beef quality in this particular lot, especially once I took out that extra bits of beef, the beef quality in this particular lot's not superb. So it's going to be a bit smaller, which is fine. It just, I just have to remember that when I'm looking at how I'm going to use it and eat it and things like that. So I went through and minced all the beef, and I swapped the containers out. So pulled a container out of the fridge, minced it into a bowl, put it back in the container, put it in the fridge, and then grabbed the next one out so that everything is staying nice and cold. It runs through the mincer better cold, but also you want to keep your meat as cold as possible. I must admit, I see sometimes on the homesteading pages these people who butcher and process sausages and beef and all that sort of stuff inside cold rooms on their property, and geez, that would be nice. Though maybe not, because imagine going in and out of a cold room and how much hotter it would seem outside if you had access to going into a cold room. But anyway. I vacuum sealed it all up into 2-kilo bags. I tend to like to keep it in sort of a 2-kilo amount because when I defrost it, I either use the full 2 kilos for multiple meals. So I might cook something that it ends up being like, with 2 kilos I could make 4 trays of pasticcio or whatever, or 3 trays maybe, and have leftovers or stuff for the freezer. Or I use half in the one meal, so I defrost the whole bag. I'll use half for dinner and then half the next day for lunch or something. But also if we're making something like hamburgers, we tend to use about 1.8 kilos in one meal for hamburgers. Hamburgers use a lot of beef compared to other meals. So 2 kilos works out as a good sort of a quantity for me. It's probably too much for a lot of people, but for us, 2 kilos works out well. So I vacuum seal it into 2-kilo lots. I really need to replace this vacuum sealer. It played up so badly this time. It's been playing up for a while, but it's getting worse and worse. This is just an Aldi one, and it's been wonderful while we've had it, but it's definitely on its way out. I am going to have to invest in a new one eventually, but just money's a bit tight at the moment, so I'm trying to just make it work. But at the same time, I don't want to risk the quality of the meat by not having a vacuum sealer that works, so it's something that's probably higher on the priority list than a lot of other things. It looks like I didn't film making dinner for some reason, probably because there was multiple people in the kitchen or whatever else. But what we did was we used the beef that I had velveted to make a stir fry for dinner. So all I did was cook up a pot of rice, just absorption method. I put rice in the pot, I put water up to just past the second knuckle on your finger level of water over the rice, and then put it on, bring it up to a boil, then turn it down to a simmer for 15 minutes. That's how I do rice. And it was just plain rice because it was to do with a stir fry. I could have used noodles. I didn't realize I had udon noodles there, but I do have those. I do realize now, and I do have that second lot of beef. So probably later in the month we'll do an udon noodle beef stir fry, something like that. But all I did was flash fried off the beef in the cast iron pan, got the cast iron pan really nice and hot before putting the beef in there, cooked it quickly, and then added a bag of par-steamed veggies. So these were frozen vegetables. Normally, if I'm making a soup or something, I throw them in frozen, but because I didn't want to overcook this beef, I did steam them to a degree. Like, they weren't cooked, but they were steamed through enough that they had a lot of the water had been cooked off and things like that. Steamed them halfway, threw them in the pot with the beef, and then put the stir-fry sauce over the top. Standard sort of a stir-fry sauce. We tend to, like the Recipe Tin Eats Chinese sauce. It was similar to that. I don't think I looked it up. I think I just sort of winged it for this particular one, but it's soy sauce and Shaoxing wine and a little bit of sugar and a little bit of sesame oil and things like that all mixed together, and then poured over the beef and the veggies, and then we served that over rice. So that worked out really well. We don't have stir-fry beef very often because I don't buy stir-fry beef, and I haven't been buying. Sometimes I used to buy like a whole rump when they were really cheap. Like, you could get them for sort of, you know, $12.95, $14.95 a kilo but you have to buy a whole one, which is like a $150 investment, and I haven't really wanted to do that lately. I would like to at some point because we love making jerky from it as well. So what I do is I freeze it, and then I slice it up really nice and thin, and then we've got it for stir fries, but we also have it for making jerky in the dehydrator, which we adore. But we do tend to eat like, if I make jerky, make a whole dehydrator worth of jerky, we can go through it within a couple of days. So, you know, but it's tasty. So we haven't had stir fry in a while, so it was nice to do that, and it's nice to have that second lot there. So the beef was a little bit on the odd side this month, but we're making the most of it, and I'll use the chunks that I got for other things as well, and then we'll have all that mince to use for various meals too, even if I have to regrind some of it just to get that texture a little bit better because of the excess amount of, it wasn't gristle, but it was lines of, there was just a lot of texture to the beef this this month. A lot of silver skin and a lot of texture. And when I'm mincing it, it's not worth my time to try and pick any of that out because it's too wasteful when you're going to mince it anyway. But that coarse grind, it was just a little bit much for the texture of the beef this month. So I might have to run it through the grinder again just to make it a little bit better mouthfeel. So that was part 4, 5, whatever it was, of food prep for the food bought in February's grocery haul. I still have a couple more to go that we've been doing bits and pieces. We've dragged it out a little bit this month because we had the buildings coming and things like that, so I feel like it's dragged out a bit, but I'm also only putting videos, 3 or 4 videos out a week, which means that some of them, and then had other videos in between, which makes it feel like it dragged out a little bit too. But anyway, that is it from me for this video, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.